Update 7.3 Old Wounds for Star Wars The Old Republic has been live for some time now, and I have thoughts. Now I'm going to confine this video to the story portion of the update, which means we won't be talking about the taxes right now, though I might do that later. But for now, we're just talking story, and that means there will be spoilers. So do what you gotta do, and let's get into it. If I were going to sum up my thoughts on the story in one word, that word would be underwhelming. It's not the worst story we've seen so far. In fact, it does a few things pretty well. But like most of the story beats we've gotten lately, it just doesn't go anywhere. It has some other problems too, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But first, let's look at some of the things I think it did right. One of the places I think the writing really shines is in the interactions we have with Torian and Arkin. While neither character is a favorite of mine, I think the conversations we get in this update are really well done. For one, they're longer than the ones we usually get with our companions these days, and while I would never say that length is always an indicator of quality, in this particular case it is, because it allows for a more in-depth discussion where ideas can actually be fleshed out, which in turn leads to actual character development. In Arkin's case, he tells us a little about the Voss ritual that helped him turn from the dark side. Along with visions of endless possibilities, he also lived through the centuries of devastation that his father has caused, as well as experiencing firsthand the suffering he inflicted on the galaxy in his pursuit of the PC. He says it was as if he lived decades within the span of a few hours, and it's this ordeal that made him want to change. But it also makes him know that nothing he does may ever be enough, and that he can probably never be forgiven. Still, he's determined to try to atone in whatever way he can. Now, this conversation hasn't turned me into an Arkin fan, particularly, but it has given weight to his redemption arc. Instead of him just being healed by some space magic, which is pretty much all we had before, we now see that he had to actually go through an ordeal, that he actually experienced the suffering that he had caused. And it was by living through all of this pain and all of this destruction that he made the choice to turn away from the dark side. And that goes a long way to making the redemption arc a lot more credible and meaningful, at least for me. Like with Arkin, and in keeping with the Old Wounds theme of the update, Torian's Alliance Alert, What Remains of Clan Kadera, sees him grappling with his past as well. He's taken the Kadera banner, or at least what's left of it after Hedekol burned it, and now he's trying to come to terms with who his father was and what he did all those years ago, and how those things have shaped his life. The subject matter isn't quite as weighty as what we get with Arkin, but we still get to see how Torian has grown and matured as a person. This scene works best for bounty hunters, of course, because they're the ones who actually have had a relationship with him in the past, and while the romance version is nice, I personally preferred the friendship version. The bounty hunter calls him Kid, like always, and then stops and says, maybe Kid doesn't apply to him anymore. It gives us a neat little callback to the class story, while also acknowledging how both characters have changed and grown over the years. My one complaint about this scene is that it doesn't work so well with non-bounty hunter PCs. Of course, your mileage may vary, and this is all down to headcanon, I suppose, but I know when I played through it with my Inquisitor, I was a bit surprised to find him in her quarters suddenly, talking about all this personal stuff when they really don't have any kind of history, any kind of personal relationship to speak of. She's his superior, and that's the entire extent of their relationship, so the scene felt a little awkward to me. But of course, as I said, that's down to opinion. Despite that though, I generally liked what they did with these characters in this update, and it would be great to see other companions get similar treatments in future updates, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that. The next thing I'll just briefly mention is the voice acting, which of course is always good in BioWare games, but I especially liked Malgus this time. Of course, we got his usual bombast, but toward the end we did get a glimpse of the person underneath all that bluster, and I thought the VO was well done there. Lastly, I do want to say how much I appreciate the fact that my characters did have different responses based on their class, even if it was far less frequent than I would have liked. Of course, these responses did reflect the same overall intent, and therefore it didn't actually change anything, which of course isn't great, but it's always nice when my Sith doesn't sound like my smuggler, who doesn't sound like my Jedi. And now for the stuff I didn't like so much. Now, many of the problems with this story update are nothing new. Most of these have been present in the most recent updates as well. The first problem is all the cool stuff happens off screen. Rivix and Tau get to find Null's lightsaber, and the people who went to Null's planet get to discover everything about her past. Our characters stand around while someone else tells them what happened. I'd have much preferred for my character to be able to go to that planet and discover Null's history for themselves. When you talk to Sana Ray, she indicates that something important happened on that planet, that the people who went are changed. It would have been really cool for our characters to be able to go there and experience the visions or whatever life-changing events happened there. And in general, I just think it's better when we get to discover things for ourselves. And before someone says our characters are too important to do those kinds of investigations now, may I remind you of this. So if our characters aren't too important to sweep the floor and cook for a bunch of gourmet construction workers, I think they're not too important to go check out Darth Null. But they don't. They hang out on Odessa and wait for someone else to show up and tell them what's going on. And this leads to a feeling that they also don't have any personal stakes in the story. Shae Vizsla has her vendetta with Hedda Cole. Malgus wants to do something. It's been years and we still don't really know what that is, but he clearly wants to do it. Sahar and Rakan have their arc, but our characters don't seem to want anything. They're there simply because they're our characters, and that makes them feel like side characters in their own story. It's great that the other characters have their own goals and arcs, but our characters need to have those things too. On top of that, they need to be present at the most important story beats. Those things shouldn't be happening off screen. The next thing that bothered me about this update was the fact that we had very little choice, and when we did get a choice, it turned out to be a fake choice. And by that I mean, no matter what we chose, the outcome was the same. Now, this is sometimes necessary, of course. We have to keep the game's narrative coherent. Can't have the game branching off into 1,000 different directions and have anything meaningful happen. The problem is, none of our choices matter. Not even the small ones. Not even in the short term. Not even ones that would seem to have a large impact on the immediate story. For example, when you head down to talk to Malgus for the 1,000th time, you discover Shae Vizsla is already there. She demands to join you because for some reason she is now the only person in the galaxy who knows him well enough to get the information that we need. If your character doesn't happen to buy that reasoning, however, and they feel it's too dangerous for her to communicate with Malgus, they can say no. In fact, they can say no 3 times. But it doesn't matter. On the 3rd time, they'll be overridden by Theron and Lana. And Shae will be allowed to be on comms with your character while they speak to Malgus. And that ends about as well as you would imagine. Clearly, the writers wanted this scene to happen no matter what, and it's not a bad scene. The problem is, it comes at the expense of player choice. A better solution would have been to have Shae simply bust in on comms while we were talking to Malgus. We get the same outcome, without the game making our choices completely worthless. What makes this scene even worse is that it allows us no choice at all in how we deal with Shae's tantrum. We can't throw her out on her ear, or introduce her to some shock therapy for being an insufferable idiot. Now, this scene is the worst example of choices that don't matter, but it's not the only one. On Voss, you learn that you need to get the 3 to talk to you. In order to do this, you need to help with the restoration project going on at Interpreter's Retreat. While you're there, you can spend your entire time trying to undermine the fragile truce between the Gormak and the Voss, and it won't matter. You'll still get your audience with the 3. This seems to largely be a roleplay or flavor choice, and I have no problem with those. In fact, I really like those. Still, it would have been nice to see some in-game consequence for your actions. I don't know, maybe you don't get the meeting with the Voss, or you have to do an extra thing to convince them that you're someone worthy of speaking to. I don't know, just something. And that brings us to the next problem. The story doesn't advance in any meaningful way. Sure, we learn a little bit more about Darth Null's history, and as interesting as that may be, it doesn't push the plot forward. We talk to Malgus yet again. Yet again, he tells us he wants to burn the galaxy. We speak to the 3, who have had a portentous vision, only to learn that their vision too says the galaxy will burn, and our characters will be pivotal to whatever happens. We've been hearing all this for years now, ever since Malgus went rogue. We're no close to learning what he's doing, or how to stop him. For that matter, we're no closer to stopping this Mandalorian nonsense either. And at this point, we just need to do something, to move something along, to learn something that changes things. But whether that can happen now with Broadsword taking over development and SWTOR losing half of its developers remains to be seen, I guess. And while I'm talking about things I didn't particularly like, let's talk about the KOTOR dialogue system. Now, I'm not opposed to voiceless protagonists. In fact, I like them in many circumstances, but having that style of dialogue shoehorned in at the tail end of the cinematic story just felt jarring and weird. I get it, it's a cost-cutting measure, and I suppose I wouldn't hate it as much if it actually did the things they said it was going to when they introduced it back during the Knights of chapters. That is, it was going to provide a way for them to give us more class-specific dialogue, more class-specific quests, but it just hasn't turned out that way, and it certainly doesn't work that way here. All it really accomplishes accomplishes is to make the story here feel lesser. And there you have it, my thoughts, good and bad, on Update 7.3 Old Wounds. What about you? Do you agree? Disagree? Don't forget to let us know in the comments, and like and subscribe for more stuff like this. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.